Hello, everybody. Welcome to all panelists and welcome to our viewers. We are the Environment Cluster at Nickel, which is a research and publication forum for the Center for New Economic Studies. We have today gathered for our monthly roundtable on a topic which is of vast importance for today and in today's time, which is on private sector in agriculture. We have Asish with us, we have Anchal, we have Shreya and Sudarshan, and myself, Krishanu. Anchal, would you like to get everyone on board with the topic at hand and provide a very short kind of a introduction into what we are going to discuss before we, of course, get into the moderated questions?
Yeah. Right. Thank you, Krishanu. Yeah, so before I had actually prepared a short PPT if I'm allowed to share the screen. Otherwise, I'll just share the screen quickly if that's all right. Can you just give me permission, because I think it's saying that you've disabled participant screen sharing.
I think it will be okay now.
Right. Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Can everybody see my? All right. Is it visible now?
Yes.
All right. Okay, just I will actually give a dashboard of introduction before we proceed here, so that we can that will set a backdrop to the questions coming ahead. Right. So essentially, private sector participation in agriculture, also known as contract farming. Now, contract farming, from the term, is basically an arrangement between the farmer and a contract agency, where the farmer essentially has to grow a crop under the contract by a contracting agency, under a forward contract, basically. So he's growing a crop, agriculture product on his land, under a definite quality and quantity standards at a pretext price. So essentially, the need for the genesis of such a policy came out because of the agricultural disequilibrium in the Indian agricultural sector. So what happened was that the farmer had to, because of the lack of any storage, post-harvest storage facilities, the farmer had to dump the entire produce for the want of the buyers. So essentially, the farmer was at a great loss because he did not have any kind of facilities, and he discovered the price there and then. But because of lack of storage facilities and various kinds of other facilities, he had no choice but to dump his produce. Secondly, was that these agro-based firms they found it very difficult to procure the quality standards product from the farmers. So hence, such an arrangement came out into being, and I guess, PepsiCo Fruit and Hindustan Level Limited were one of the few big corporate giants that entered into the agricultural market somewhere around in the early 1990s. And they sort of entered into markets which were quite commercially, into the states which actually had commercial agriculture, where commercial agriculture was quite viable. For instance, Punjab. So there were various studies that got into various studies that sort of observed the operations of contract farming closely, stated that even though they increase the product, increase the gross revenue of the farmers by a great margin, it also had its disadvantages. Now, if I talk about certain advantages, the very first advantage that a very big advantage that the farmers had, that these contracting agencies actually procured the entire produce from the farmers. So the farmers did not have to rely on any kind of open mandis, which was actually quite risky, because sometimes the open market the price that they provided was so low that it did not even cover the cost of production for the farmers. So this was one of the major advantages of contract farming in terms of was very lucrative for the farmers. Secondly was that, of course, all the kind of technical assistance, which was very sophisticated for the farmers, which was otherwise quite unattainable from the state, that was provided by the contracting agency. And third was the provision of credit, which was quite easily and provided by the contracting agency or through a third party. So these were major advantages for the farmers to go for in a system like this. When I talk about disadvantages now, one of the major disadvantages when it comes to contract farming was that the quality norms was essentially just decided by the farm. Agency happens is that the agency can reduce the entire, reject the entire produce of the farmers based on a certain quality norms, which was not prefixed. Now, what happens is that, of course, when there is a glut in the market, then of course the farmer is getting a better price, but that price is marginally higher. But if the contracting agency sort of rejects the entire price, the entire crop, then of course the farmer is at a greater loss, and then the farmer will go into the open mandis. And in open mandis, what happens is that there are also non-contracting farmers, and when these two compete with each other, it will result into a price crash. And this will again hamper, it will create a great turmoil even with the non-contracting farmers. So essentially the farmer is also getting robbed here. So one of the major reasons for the sort of contract farming is raised questions was because of this. That also had so these firms only opted for farmers which were larger growers, not did not choose farmers which were suppose small and marginal farmers. Then they opted for those areas where their reputation of exploitation was not known. So they would not nurture the already existing farmers they had. They would always shift their base wherever their reputation was not known. So a certain sort of disadvantages that contracted farming had was because of this. Now, of course, there are certain concerns, like I mentioned, that the farmers had because of contract farming was because of this. Yeah, certain concerns, like I mentioned. Yeah, pretty much that's it. I hope I was able to wrap up the discussion, the topic, and we will base the. So I'll just questions here if that's right, or we can just start questions. Right.
Yes, thank you, Anchal. You can stop the screen share. Then we can everybody can be visible. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'll just stop.
Okay. Thanks, Anshul. That was a very balanced and insightful intro into the topic of contract farming and basically the private sector in agriculture. So without without further ado, we can directly delve into the questions that we have for our panelists today. The first question that I'd like to raise to everybody here, even Anshul, if you'd like to add something, you're most welcome. That are the state regulated markets and the open markets in India able to compete with the services that are provided by the corporations to the farmers? And why do you think so? Or if you do not, what are the reasons for it? Are the state regulated markets or the open markets able to compete with the corporations when it comes to giving services to the farmers or procuring the grain from the farmers? Anybody would like to take this up? Yes, Ashish, please.
Okay, so I'm not engaged firsthand with this thing, but I've read a few things on it. So I'll tell you based on what I know and how I've interacted with a few people in this field. I think both are evils in the current scenario. Even if we consider the APMCs, that is the mandis basically, and the corporations, because of course, as it was, so we cannot talk about this without referring to the farm laws that were brought in, right? So as it was envisaged in those, that a farm, if we remove the APMC and all, all sorts of, the farmer does not have the buying power, or that rather the bargaining power. I'm sorry, it's the bargaining power. It does not exist in the current social setting. Even in the current way, most farmers do not sell in the mandis. They have to sell outside, because the mandis, like the average that is mandated by the bureau is something like uh, every farmer must have a mandi within a 5 kilometer radius. Okay, and that radius today is, so 5 kilometer corresponds to 80 square kilometer in terms of area. But today the statistics is 496 square kilometers. So you can imagine of mandis is of course not equitable, and it is not accessible to most farmers. So then they depend on the middlemen, not RTRs which are in the mandis, but the middlemen, and they connect them with the private players in the field. And this is where most exploitation happens. And how can we expect this to change again? You cannot stop the middleman who is operating in the private sort of framework, and based on my understanding. So I think none of them, in terms of service, I think farmers are always losing out, because most of the times they're in debt. And mostly I read some report, like with each crop output they suffer a marginal decline in income, which is mostly not visible, because the labor of the family members, that is not counted towards. So that also should count, right? It is not being counted. So based on all of these, I think the only way, I would also attach a way forward. Now the way forward could not be like, okay, you can sell here also, you can sell there also. The thing should be like the subsidies, the huge amount, more than 100 billion that we are spending in subsidies. Some of that should go to investments also, so that the supply line, like from farm to fork, if this thing is incentivized, and if this thing, the infrastructure in this field, that becomes better, then of course the farmers will have knowledge of the entire supply lines, and then maybe out of what their bargain put, and eventually the money that is coming into them. So that's what I feel.
Yeah, thank you, Ashit. That those were quite, very clearly put, thoughts. Yeah, Sudarshan, you have any alternate points, or would you like to echo? Yeah, Sudarshan and then Rajat.
I just wanted to add to Ashish's discussion. I hope I'm audible. So also part of the question that we were also trying to address, Ashish was also getting at, is in terms of the competitiveness that the differential that corporates seem to offer. So overall, one of the things that Anchal had brought up, and that there was a certain amount of a greater Pareto efficiency to be gained when corporations enter into contract with farmers, because they clearly have an incentive to, in some sense, provide favorable conditions to the farmer, at the very least at the start, so as to maximize their profits in the long run and get a good quality producer. So, well, of course, that's as Ashish has pointed out, and we had also discussed before. There's a lot of intermediary actions that come into play, which provides room for exploitation and so on. But the point of the matter here is that the competitive, it's very clear that state-owned, state-regulated markets also are at a competitive disadvantage in terms of providing favorable conditions, initial favorable conditions to farmers, because companies can share technologies, provide farmers with inputs and so on, whereas even the prices offered at these mandis seem to be at times abysmally low. And as a result, I believe that at least in terms of competitive advantages, corporations do seem to have the edge. So that's the prima facie impression that we're looking at. And of course, moving on to the discussion, I'm sure we'll also address the disadvantages that Anchal brought up.
Thank you, Sudarshan. Rajat, you had your hand up. Would you like to add something?
Talk about regulated culture, majorly talk about recorded literature, right? Because that's how the world around us seems to understand things. But since I come from Punjab, I can tell you the role of middleman is not just limited to procurement. A lot of times, the marginal farmers actually get credits from these middlemen even before giving their crop, right? So they essentially get the credit to grow those crops, right? I'm not sure if such system can be, built around the corporate farming. The second point which I would like to raise is the fact that in the corporate farming scenario, the marginal farmer will be the most suffered one, because even if you look at dairy, until and unless a big corporate like Amul has a monopoly over the entire sector, the various market players, corporates, will have no advantage going to a small marginal farmer to procure the crop, right? Because simply they are not getting the amount of crop they need for their function. So that's why I feel that in terms of procurement, some sort of monopoly is needed at the end of the day. And then we also have the case of so there was this case in Punjab where PepsiCo asked some farmers to grow a certain kind of potato for the chips, and there was something that the farmers were not able to meet the standards of those potatoes, right? And they had the contract, and the corporate refused to procure those potatoes despite the farmers investing all their money. So I think until and unless we have these structures in place, corporate farming for me is, I'm very skeptical about this. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you, Ashish and Sudarshan. Those were excellent points. Even I have one point, like something I read up on UP elections, that day, regarding, as Ashish mentioned, who is losing out? The farmers are losing out because they are not being paid enough, right? But there are instances where they are not paid at all by the state sanctioned markets, where there are so many dues that are yet to be cleared for the farmers who have sold the crop, but they have not yet received the payment. It's actually one of the very key points of like voting in, especially in Western Uttar Pradesh, the sugarcane belt, basically, where sugarcane farmers are not receiving their payments yet. It's delayed payments and it's piling on and things like that. They're very, very frustrated over this. So I think this is again one of the reasons why, we can think that, farmers are losing out from both the sides. And I think the first question actually brought out quite a few points, nuances, basically. Anchal, would you like to take up the next question and get the discussion forward? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is that what are some of the implications of the withdrawal of the government interventions, for instance, subsidies from agriculture, that are going to have, what are the implications that it is going to have on farming or farmers at a larger scale? So yeah, that's the second question. So anybody? Yeah. Yes.
So,
Yes, Ashish. Yeah.
okay. So in the current situation, we have to admit most of India's farming is based on subsidies. You take out subsidies, it dies. Like this destruction, chaos, creative destruction. This will not even be creative. So I would say take withdrawing subsidies like at once. That's not going to be a sound option. And all it private. I mean, that's also, for example, say those guys like less private side or private market in the marketplaces and sell it. But currently, like that was brought up in India during the debate last year. But we need to realize that in India we still do not have that capacity, right? There, like the farms are hectares long. In India, a farmer has less than like 1.5 hectares of land on average. So based on that, the productivity quotient is also very low. And now the initial investment, or rather, they think about power, water, these things are costly. Now, how will the marginal farmer, who's marginal at this point, even with the subsidies, how will they be able to afford it without that? And then there's another thing, like if you keep on subsidizing power of water in Punjab, you're seeing the water table go down. And then there's, of course, then there's the debate about climate change, and so much of power is being consumed. And then it's also about what sort of goods are procured, right? Subsidizing is not let's say consume much power. Okay, and it has more demand, more value in the international market. That is not being subsidized, or that is not being purchased at a premium. There's no MSP for that. So these are the issues, and of course, and then there's the socio-political part to withdrawing subsidies or even considering to do anything, as we saw last year. Like everything is in front of us. What happened last year? So with the protests, basically. So then the social, political, this sort of the complex that exists in the ground, I think that will really not allow to sort of withdraw subsidies in the scale that we envision. So it really needs some huge churning, and the attempt at that which we saw, that did not work out well, which has basically stopped all all prospects of any farm reforms in the next, at least in the next 10 years or decade. So this is what I feel.
Thank you. Thank to add some.
Yeah. So one thing is, I agree with the fact that as long as we keep on giving subsidy on water, obviously we see water table going down. But another point which I would like to add here is the fact that sometimes we look at subsidy as a model from a very myopic lens. What I mean by this is that when a farmer is getting subsidy, it's not just because it is enabling him or her to grow the crop. You also have to consider the fact that the per capita income of the entire country is so limited that if you stop giving subsidy to the farmer, the price of the crop itself will go up, right? Apart from the fact that PDS just, the crops we get through PDS, those are the requirements. That's why they are procured through government. But what about the other crops, right? A common man needs everything to eat. And if you stop giving subsidy to the farmer, the price will go up. So my idea can't be view keep looking at much and the implications here. If subsidies are withdrawn, I believe that majority of India will not be able to even ensure their regular nutritional requirements. So that's where I am on this entire debate. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Rajat. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I just like to add a few things, like like I am primarily studying Himachal. So for instance, so now since Himachal government has actually withdrawn from subsidies it used to provide, for instance, fertilizers, anti-hail nets, that 80% subsidies that the government used to provide to the farmers, now everything has been withdrawn. So the state actually does not have that kind of money to, because agriculture is not taxed, the state does not have that kind of money to sort of pump into procure the products first from the companies and then subsidize it. So what is happening is that the small and marginal farmers will now not be able to have access to premium fertilizers, to all these equipments like anti-hail nets or any kind of modern equipments that they earlier used to have. So I think it's yeah, I mean that's what the farmers, I think the small and marginal farmers are going to be quite impacted with removal of subsidies here. Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Like even I'd like to add something. Like you have to also think it from other lenses, right? Feasible lenses. Like we have seen how people react, especially farmers react when cases of subsidy, being rolled back happens. You have the farm laws where one of the additional demands were that there should be some sort of subsidies in place. Later demands of the farm laws. So there is this political dimension to subsidies as well. Like you can't really escape the political dimension. Like of course there is the economical part of it. Like a lot of people, like I've been reading into the farm laws and farm protests, and Center did a long sort of field work on the farmers protests in the border regions, Tikri border, Singhu border, etc. And it was found out that a lot of the youth now find agriculture extremely unproductive. And why is that so? Not because they are not growing, but because there is absolutely no profits in that. and it's not profitable. So they're like entering into this vicious circle of going to the cities, migrating to the cities, not finding any jobs. Jobs are precarious in the cities. They have to come back, and it's all sort of resentment from everywhere. It's a circle of resentment. And how do we rescue agriculture from it? So that's perhaps one of the questions, larger questions that we can ask or ourselves, right? Yeah, if nobody has any other points to add, perhaps we can move on. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll move on to the fourth question. Perhaps the third question was it was asked, it was hinted at, answered by a few of the panelists here. So the question that we have in front of us is that, like, what will contract farming mean for different types of farmers? Like, what would it mean for big individual farmers and small and marginal farmers? How would it impact them? Would it be a differential impact, or would it be there would be some sort of equity seen in that case? Yeah, Sudarshan, please.
So as you mentioned yourself, this was hinted to previously. One of the important things that corporates look for when it comes to contract farming is volume and quality. Right? Of course, quality is also subject to the inputs that they're able to subsidize and provide to the farmers, but volume is subject to the farmers' holdings, in the sense that the farmer can only produce to a certain extent, to the extent of the land he has, and obviously aggregating produce from a lot of marginal farmers involves a lot of transaction costs and by itself a lot of effort for these corporates. So as a result, it not only becomes more convenient but also more approaches already some amount of towards the populace that benefits from contract farming. So given that in the first place there is a selection bias involved, I believe that there's necessarily going to be a differential impact on the farming population in India. Obviously, already disadvantaged farmers are going to be disadvantaged further, and the wealthy ones will, of course, continue to grow rich, and more importantly, at a scary pace, given that the profitability and the bargaining power they would hold as opposed to small and marginal farmers is also bound to be significantly higher, raising success rates at arbitration, disputes, and so on. So yeah, that's about it.
I think I agree with Sudarshan in that point, because I think actually contract farming would be most beneficial to the small farmers in terms of ensuring they get a income, and their the produce they get, as Anchal said, that's the main good part about contract farming, is that the entire produce is taken up and they don't have to bargain and find for other buyers and so on. So I think it would positively impact small farmers the most. But because there's a given bias of who corporates want to choose, and at the same time, there's a power dynamics where corporates and big farmers can easily like outmatch each other. I think that's why like big farmers today do have a larger say with contract farming. And I think it also provides an insurance backup for these farmers. So it is going to be something which you would hope would help, which is why I think the farm laws are
Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay,
Yeah.
so I think these things you would really hope would help the farmers with sort of into building on relation what corporates are looking for, because longer term relationships ensures quality and quantity. I don't think such contracts are really going to help marginalized farmers, and you can see a differential between the big farmers and the marginalized farmers, even when it comes to contract farming.
Thank you, Shreya. Thank you, Shreya and Sudarshan, for some really insightful points. I actually just wanted to add one quick point. I was actually, sorry, Ashish, yeah, please, you can go ahead. Yeah,
No, I'll go ahead last.
Okay. Okay. So I was actually
You can
reading
please
up a few
conclude.
things. Uh, yeah. So actually, yeah. So I was reading up a few things, and it was written. It was stated that contract farming is actually it's actually targeted for small farm, big farm, a high capacity, go to the mandis and then opt for sort of the prices offered by them. They don't have to be bound by a contract as such. But the small farmers, essentially, the entire produce is dependent on these big mandis, and when they are getting assured, so they are sort of going to be, contract farming is going to be more lucrative for them. So, I mean, yes, I mean, that was something which I read. Yeah, thank you.
Can I
And
just add on to Anchal before
yeah,
Ashish
please.
goes? So I actually agree with Anchal because I think it's from which perspective you see that matters, right? So if I see from the corporate's perspective, they prefer reaching out to a big farmer because the big farmer gives them assurity as well as gives them quality and quantity. But when you see it from the small farmer's point of view, I think it makes sense that the small farmer enters a contract which gives them insurance and assurity because they're risk averse. They don't know the risk and so on. Contract helps them. So I think it's from the point where you see, and I agree with you in saying that because big farmers are risk, like they don't mind taking the risk, given that they have the capacity to do so. Mandis would work out better for them. No doubt.
Right, right. Yeah. Thank you, Shreya. Ashish, please go ahead.
So very quickly, I'll just present a comparative perspective in terms of urbanization and industrialization in Southeast Asian countries, for example, Taiwan or Korea. Uh, Now they had a breakthrough in terms of agriculture, where now today currently they have less than 15% of their workforce engaged in agriculture, right? And they could manage. In India, we have almost like 50+% of workforce as per this different statistics. Now, here's the problem, right? In India, it's mostly a majburi, like it's a compulsion that if your ancestors have done it, you don't have any better option. You'll have to do it. There, the state is almost invested in the entire thing. Like it has become a lucrative business in the rural areas, but it is not the only option. It is not the only business. Those are the structural constraints which those economies, those states could actually address. In India, due to of course structural constraints that we have already discussed in this discussion, uh, it's just not happening. So what happens, like there, the workforce that got released from their fields that went on to the capitals, went on to the cities. That's how they added the, that's why they were called tigers, right? East Asian tigers. And the economy, the rapid growth, increase in per capita incomes. In India, the productive forces are locked up in the rural areas, and even in cities they don't have any better options because of constraints of barriers to entry, education, etc. So these are things, large questions that we need to actually, that policy needs to consider and answer. So just wanted to address this in the.
Thank you, Ashish. Is there anybody else who'd like to add to the question before, like, I provide a very brief conclusion? Like, we're running out of time, but just provide a short synopsis of what we discussed. Sudarshan, Rajat, would you like to add something or not?
I think I'm in agreement with Ashish's points here. So we're good to go.
Okay, great. Yeah. I think I really what Shreya just mentioned. It just rang basically. I echo with what she said, that the contract farmers, and especially the big capital, would choose allocations which are very, very safe, right? They would pull out of investments if there is a short, very dynamic change in their investments portfolio, etc. So thinking about that in terms of, like, allocations in agriculture and investments in agriculture, I think it's quite a shaky ground, right? And especially for marginal farmers, uh you know another question is, where do you buy it from, right? There are certain regions which are like the, what do we call it, the rice bowl of, or the what was the word, I forgot actually, that was given to Punjab, which is the food grain or something of India, right? Like the contract farmers would be inclined to buy it from especially those regions, right, where people already have the networks and already have the storage capacities and everything, right? What about other states, right? That's a very important question, right? So that's something that was very interesting that was brought about by Shreya. Coming to Ashish's point, again, you're talking about urban mobility, etc. But again, if you want to accelerate growth through urban mobility, that would really have to mean that there should be jobs in the urban metropolis, right? But the jobs are precarious, and like there are youth which is migrating to the urban areas, but they are not finding any stable jobs, right? They are very casual jobs like shopkeepers here and there, very casual jobs they have to work, and they're returning back to their land because that is all they have. Like the land is all they have nothing else. So I think these are extremely important questions to ponder about. Since you've brought about various different lenses. Ashish brought about industrialization. Shreya brought about what is to invest without risk, right, for the farmers. Sudarshan and Ashish, or Sudarshan and Rajat also pointed out various instances through which we can really look into the matter with great nuance. But overall, I think it has been a very productive discussion, and it's been great. Thank you, Anchal, for moderating the session. It was the first time, and I think you did quite brilliantly. Can we have a thumbs up for Anchal? It was her first engagement with the center. So yeah, that's great. That's great. I think yeah. Thank you, Anshul. Yeah. So I believe it was as enriching for everybody here and our viewers as it was for me and possibly all our columnists and panelists, basically. And yeah, we'll meet you next month with another topic. Thank you all for joining in.